What if most of who you are is actually hidden from you? A lot of people online seem to be familiar with Carl Jung's shadow work, but what I'm sharing today is something that includes this idea, but is so much more than that too. We're exploring something called psychosynthesis. I'm going to go through a very simple framework that takes into account your heights as well as your depths, your highest potentials, but also those elements that hold you back from becoming who you know deep down that you could become. We're going to break this down into a very simplified overview of just a few key elements, and I'm going to draw out what is called or referred to as the egg diagram first. So I'll label it and then I'll explain some of the more important aspects of some of those labels. I'll also make it really clear how this relates to in your real everyday life as well, because I want this to be practical. I genuinely believe that this could be so transformational for so many people because I know firsthand just how much it's helped me from going from somebody with imposter syndrome and daily anxiety to a much more peaceful and calmer inner world. So I hope to do the idea justice over a series of lessons, not just one. So firstly, let's draw a dotted oval like this. Just give me 1 second as I draw a terrible oval, which you can all judge me for. There we go. This represents everything that we are personally aware of and could be aware of. The majority of this will be unconscious, as we will see in a second. And then in the center, we have a smaller dotted circle. Again, feel free to judge me. That one's not too bad, actually. So this represents our field of consciousness at any given time. In other words, all the things that we are aware of and know that we are aware of consciously. In the middle, we'll put a little dot here as well, just to represent your first person awareness. Or in everyday language, when you say I, who is that referring to? So let's make all this clear before we even move on with any more theory. So just a nice, really simple example for this. You are aware that you are watching this video right now. So that would fall under this little circle because you're consciously aware of that fact. But if I asked you a more complicated question, like who exactly do you admire as a role model and give me 5 specific traits about them, you probably don't have that answer available to you straight away in your mind. You might be able to work it out, and the answer still has an impact on you, even if you don't realize it all the time, but it's going to fall under the label of unconscious material. Unconscious because it's operating behind the scenes without us being aware of it. Okay, this is the part where it gets exciting, and this is where it can be used practically in an everyday life as well. So at the bottom of this egg, we have what is going to be called the lower unconscious. I'm going to separate this with a dotted line, another dotted line, and I'll see why in a second, or you'll see why in a second, sorry. So, to quote page 17 in this book simply called Psychosynthesis, so this book here is a beautiful book, just called Psychosynthesis by Roberto Assagioli, who is the creator of the model. The lower consciousness contains these elements here. So the life of the body, the fundamental drives and the primitive urges, complexes, dreams and imaginations of an inferior kind, and inferior being a very key word here, uncontrolled psychological and parapsychological processes, phobias, obsessions, compulsions, and so on. But that is a lot of jargon. So, in simpler terms, it's mainly those parts of ourselves that we push away from our awareness because they're too heavy, they're too overwhelming, or they're laden with charged emotion. Given that it's unconscious, it's inaccessible to our consciousness in regular daily life, but it still has an impact. It's still a part of us. I don't need to be aware all the time about all the pain that I've suffered through, all my humiliations and my shameful moments, all my bodily aches and pains, all my childhood thoughts and experiences and so on, because it would simply be too much to take into account and still act in a meaningful way on a moment-to-moment basis. It's just too many things to consider at any given moment. But sometimes these thoughts will burst through into our conscious awareness when we least expect it, when certain events or sensations or thoughts trigger us. And that's exactly why this line is dotted here. It's not permanently repressed. And through a sort of psychological osmosis, material can pass from conscious awareness to the unconscious and vice versa. So this can just represent any particular thought or bit of material. Unfortunately, we don't just get to shut ourselves off from the negative parts of our life without also then having an impact on the more positive parts of our life. So let's turn our attention to the top of this egg with the higher unconscious. I'll separate this again with another dotted line because the same principle applies as the lower. We might not always have access to this straight away, but we can become aware of it. Let me just tidy this up. Yeah, that looks all right. So this, the higher unconscious, is the source of our higher intuitions, our sense of joy, our higher potentials, our creative impulses, our morals and our ethical codes of conduct, and our ability to think bigger than just ourselves and consider what's good for humanity overall and what it is to be an ideal human. But again, that's a lot of jargon, so I want to make this simple. In simpler terms, it's those moments where we sense a deeper meaning in life, where we feel a pull towards something or becoming something more than we currently are. If you're familiar with the terms peak experience and self-actualizing, then that is where they would fit in with this model. And again, this all sounds great, but the problem is this is the higher unconscious. On a day-to-day basis, we're largely unaware of the heights of who we could become. And we're also generally unaware of the beauty that surrounds us at all times and the possible joy and potentially our sense of spirituality too. So going back to that example from before, if we become aware of who it is that we admire, so we can use this as a representation of who we admire, we can then draw that into our conscious awareness and begin to analyze exactly what it is that we admire about them. If we can identify some specific traits, not just in that one person, but in many others, then we've made some of these contents of the higher unconscious conscious. And then we have the beginnings of a plan that can help us to transform into that person that we want to become. We can then start to integrate these aspects into our conscious personality, that sense of I that I was talking about before. And the exact same happens with our lower unconscious. By becoming aware of our drives and our compulsions and our coping mechanisms and all those overly charged emotions that we might feel when we're triggered by an external event, we can learn to make those conscious as well. And what happens is, in making these conscious, we can then start to analyze them and have so much more control about how we react to them. And as we do both of these things, addressing the higher and the lower aspects of ourselves, we expand the potentials of what's going on all around us. And this expands the middle unconscious. That's these parts here. In other words, a wider spectrum of experiences in our daily life becomes available to us. And that's what the middle unconscious is all about. If we can learn to become more aware of everything around us, we can become more aware of how we respond to it and what that can tell us about ourselves. It gives us more control over our future. The best way I've heard this referred to is being surprised by pain and being surprised by joy. So surprised by pain, meaning that you might become more aware of your road rage or how upset or angry you are about your own childhood or not mourning all of those lost opportunities from your past which have come and gone, and allowing yourself to become more aware of your own unexpressed sadness, potentially. But then also being surprised by joy, meaning that suddenly you might find the smallest mundane thing extremely beautiful, and how incredible and exciting life can be in its best moments, how close you are to living that kind of life, and allowing yourself to be genuinely optimistic and in awe of the world and those people around you, and feeling a huge sense of aliveness and vitality to voluntarily face the future with this quiet excitement. And remember, these two are linked. And the purpose is all about expanding the middle unconscious, widening our spectrum of daily experiences. So we can't have the good without the bad, the positive without the negative. We need to accept that at any one moment we might have more access to a heightened sense, but in another we might be confronting our depths. But over time, this will even out as the higher and the lower are carefully integrated. So the goal should be about widening these potentials that are around us at all times, raising our awareness to these potentials and realizing how we act in accordance with them, learning to slowly and carefully integrate overall our heights and our depths. You'll never be able to integrate everything from the unconscious, and neither would you want to, but that is a video for another time. I just want to make it really clear that this is why this diagram is so extremely practical. It's not just theory. It's helping us to become of who we are on a wider scale and realizing how much is unconsciously being processed on a constant basis. Just for the sake of repetition, I want to make this key point just super, super clear. We must learn to integrate the depths of who we are, that's the lower unconscious, whilst identifying the heights of who we are and who we could yet become, that's the higher unconscious, and learning to integrate this as well. It's a combined height and depth psychology. It's a personal psychosynthesis. What makes this diagram so practical is that we can see which aspects of our daily life fall under each of these categories so that we can then start to analyze them and see how we can choose to start to react to them in the future. I've barely even scratched the surface on a diagram like this, and I've intentionally left out other aspects of the model, like the higher self, which would go here, the role of the will in this model, and the collective unconscious that would surround this, because I want this to be a very simple overview. I'm going to go into much more detail in future videos and give more theory as well as practical guidance on how to actually use this to make massive breakthroughs and transformations in your own life. But if you wanted a book suggestion to start studying this for yourself, I'd suggest the book, which is simply titled Psychosynthesis by Roberto Assagioli. It's the book that I referred to earlier in this video, and it's split into two parts, which is principles and techniques. So it's nice and straightforward. Bit of theory, bit of practice. I can't wait to dive deeper into this and discuss personal psychosynthesis, transpersonal psychosynthesis, primal wounding, unifying centers. I could go on. There's a lot of jargon. I'm really excited about this. But it's just a huge topic. It's so important, and I barely see anybody talking about this online. So I can't wait to actually give this a beautiful idea, just a bit of a voice. Right, I'm leaving it there for this one, but I will see you in a future lesson where we'll go into specific elements in a much deeper way. All right, see you then.